Good morning.
Helps if I unmute myself and say good morning.
Good morning.
Howdy, all. We will give it a couple more minutes to see who else is going to arrive. As a reminder, Tim is the person normally in charge of running this meeting, but he is out on paternity leave and left it in the as yet to be determined capable hands of me and Mitch. Most likely it will be a shorter meeting. There's not a lot going on. We have a legislative update to provide, and we're going to talk a little bit about the small projects NOFA. With that in mind, we will go ahead and wait another couple minutes to see if anyone else shows up, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think this looks like a good enough crowd to begin. Hello all, Martin Jarvis, State Tax Credits Program Analyst at OHCS, standing in for Tim Mahern Macias, who is out on paternity leave. I am here with the support of Mitch Hanush and Tanisha Rosas to do the best we can with what we have available to share. Let's go ahead and start off with the reminder that we are going to be releasing the ag worker housing tax credit this year in the small projects NOFA that we're currently working on. It is due to be released in June. That will include a whole bunch of other funding. Well, actually, interestingly, we have decided to combine the normal like VETS GHAP NOFA and the small projects GHAP NOFA into one combined document. So it'll be the VETS small projects NOFA. We really couldn't think of a better name for it, even though there was a lot of brainstorming behind the scenes.
To be
It's
clear,
already
though,
being.
you can apply for both resources separately. You don't need to apply for VETS funds to be eligible for the NOFA, and vice versa. Just to clarify that too. But yeah, they'll come out at the same time essentially.
Thanks, Mitch. That's a good clarification. Are there any questions about the small projects NOFA, about what sorts of projects can apply? Any questions related to that at all? I should also note that this will most likely be the last time that the agricultural housing tax credit for community-based projects goes out in a combined NOFA. We are moving back to offering it as a standalone resource starting in 2024. Any questions?
Good morning. This is Maria Elena Guerra from Far Working Housing Development Corporation. Would you mind to just recap what this combination of sources can be used for? Number of units, new construction only. There is several people that is new in this in housing development, and I think they should have kind of like a refreshment or a more detailed information, if you don't mind.
Of course, that is an excellent question, Meg. Thank you. 1 second. Let me pull up the document, and I can give you a couple of previews.
I think too, when is our next, these meetings are every other month, right? Or no, it's monthly. So I think we'll be able to bring a more finalized draft to you all and send it for your review, or at least pieces of it for your review ahead of either the next meeting or prior to it going live, so we can discuss some of the components that I know have been sticking points, and try to make sure it all works for you in your projects before that happens. So, but yeah, I think it's a good call. Thanks, Meg. High level overview makes sense if you've got it handy, Martin.
It is apparently taking its time today. I'm having some issues with the VPN. Okay, so I will correct myself if I'm wrong, but the small projects NOFA will be allowing, we will be allowing new construction and preservation. Preservation will include AC rehab and health and safety needs, the usual preservation goals for the NOFA, just with the caveat that it will be only for projects between 5 and 40 units. There will be regional set-asides as well, with a focus on the split between urban and rural. As Mitch said, you do not have to include veterans units, but we've also set it up so that if you would like to include units specifically targeting veterans, you can request funds within your small projects NOFA. You can also just have a veterans only project. The ag worker housing tax credits will be in their own sort of ag worker housing tax credit set aside for projects that are more interested in reaching for those points, or at least specific points around things that are specifically for the ag worker community to help our community-based sponsors who are very good at this ag worker housing construction, to make sure they get more consideration for those points than someone who is just seeking the tax credits because they're relatively easy to get. So we have taken that into account, and we will make sure that our community partners who are actually working in this area have first consideration for any inclusion of ag worker housing tax credits in the projects. Lisa?
Hi, thanks, Martin. Can you use the ag workforce housing tax credits with the other resources available in the small projects NOFA?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe this is an obvious question. This is Lori Hafer from Legal Aid Services, but I'm just assuming that, so tell me again how the timeline works, like in terms of whether, like how much money is available for the ag tax credits do you have to kind of wait until after a certain date to see if the growers are going to use those to determine the amount? And then I guess I'm just assuming that whatever that amount is will definitely go to house farm workers, right? It won't be able to be used in other ways. But if you could confirm that, that would be great.
Yep, that is correct. This year, the on-farm set-aside ends in July, and any remaining tax credits from that set-aside will be included with the small projects NOFA for release with the larger pool of community-based credits. Currently, the amount of community-based credits in the NOFA is 7.5 million, which is half the total set-aside total amount plus the leftover from last year's on-farm set-aside. We expect it to grow with this year's on-farm set-aside being re-included. I do not know the exact amount at this point. We have a fair amount of on-farm applications that we're processing now, but it seems likely that it'll go up by at least another $500,000 worth of tax credits. Lisa?
Yeah, Martin, is that 7.5 million effectively 3.25?
No, we got that changed in legislation a few years ago. The amount of credits we have to award biannually is, I think, 16.5 million, regardless. That said, we still have the same rule that they can only cover up to 50% of eligible costs.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Of course. Lori?
I guess I wanted to ask about, and maybe this is more of a future conversation, but just when it gets moved to like in 2024, when it gets returned to the other process, you know, I guess do you have thoughts about what that process will be? Because it does seem like, right, there could be more people applying for the more projects applying for the funds than funds available, and kind of what, it seems like the first in process, process does not work very well, right? If there's oversubscription. And so kind of whether there will be a certain date by which applications are due and then criteria applied to determine which projects will get funded.
So that is a good point. We have moved away from the first come, first serve model with those sorts of offerings, and it's more of a first come, first reviewed model. And as long as they meet the scoring criteria in the solicitation, they will be funded if we have funds remaining. That said, we will be reviewing them on a rolling basis, but we will not automatically fund them.
I think too, there's a lot of engagement with this group and others that we want to have around ways to make this work for folks. The initial move to the small projects combination was in an attempt to better fully fund projects so that they weren't having to come back multiple years and secure more and more tax credits for an individual project. And we'd be able to more efficiently utilize the funding. I think that we've gotten great feedback from this group and others that, timelines are tricky, especially with RD projects, and there's other kind of issues with that. We really want to, address those concerns, but also not just go back to a process that, we changed for a reason too. So I think trying to be creative with you all, finding new ways to connect to other resources while being able to be flexible timing wise, I think is sort of where at least my head's at. I know we've had some discussions with our LITEC program managers around ways we could incorporate some type of funding into the 9% funding rounds, with some type of ag worker tax credit funding into those rounds. And as Martin said, we're looking into kind of more effective ways to do sort of our previous process of a first come, first reviewed type of situation. But it's a very competitive resource, as you all are very aware of, and we want to make sure that the folks who are going to give us the best projects to the state and to the farm workers are able to access it, not just whoever kind of is able to pull the trigger first. So there's a lot of consideration that we need to make. I think we'll be having conversations as we probably get through this small project NOFA cycle and start thinking about how these tax credits will work in the next biennium, I think this will be, probably the first group we tap for your expertise and knowledge.
Excellent point, Mitch. Thank you. So now that I no longer also handle the preservation stuff for our agency, I will have more time to focus on ag worker housing tax credits improvements, and I can guarantee you will be hearing about our proposals, and we will be requesting feedback for those proposals, starting, I would think, as early as late summer. Carmen? Go ahead, Mitch.
Hi, just a quick question. Is there any way that we can increase the unit count to cover 50 units instead of 40?
So at this point, the amount we cover with the small projects NOFA has already been set, and we don't foresee that changing. That said, you can always put in that request. We're not the right group for that. Technically, the GHAP program manager, Ed Brown, would be the person to direct that request at.
Okay, yeah, we have a project that's 48 units, so we would be excluded if the count is only at 40.
We'll bring that back to him. I think, we'll, we can talk to him about that 40 unit count. The NOFA is still in drafts. It needs to go to Department of Justice for sufficiency review. So there's still some time to make adjustments to it. Like I said, I think we'll try to bring some of those key criteria back here probably next month, so that we can get y'all's input on some of the scoring criteria and I think some of those threshold characteristics as well, to make sure it's going to work for these ag projects in particular. So I appreciate that, Carmen. We'll definitely bring that to Ed.
Thank you.
Any
I'd say
other?
too, like just and to go back to, sorry, Martin, to go back to sort of the thought on 2024, I think that potentially is a really good segue to our legislative our government relations coordinator for ARH, Tanisha Rosas. She has been helping us with all of these stuff going on in this session, and there is a lot. And I think I would say that the 2024 structure of the tax credit could be very contingent on what happens in this session, because there are a lot of moving parts that we want to be able to be complementary to with the tax credit, as opposed to creating competing funding sources or a convoluted mess, essentially. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any feedback, or if we should just kick it to Tanisha, but seemed like a good segue, and I'm loath to miss that opportunity. So
Perfect. Tanisha Rosas. I work with our government relations team at Oregon Housing and Community Services, she, her pronouns. Just a quick update. There's not a lot of official updates, considering last time we have both of they're not our bills, but both of the sunset extension bills for both this tax credit and our other tax credit are sitting in tax expenditures. There hasn't been an update on whether or not they're going to move those yet. They don't need to. It would have been an early extension anyway. So even if they don't, there is no concern or no worries there. They're just trying to get on top of it. Part of the slowdown is there have been interesting things on the Senate and House floors, slowing things down. So bills are kind of stuck in a lot of ways. There's a lot of bills that relate to housing in general that are currently in Ways and Means. Overall, there are some considerations. The governor has her preferred budget, and there's also budgetary needs that the co-chairs want, and currently they're not aligned. So there's a lot of conversations that are for that group deciding what are the priorities for session. So that's why everything's kind of paused, because those backdoor conversations and discussions amongst themselves are happening that we are not privy to. So that's kind of where that stands. And then Meg, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that subject, and Tanisha, very important. It's extremely concerning to me that the $5 million towards the growers to improve their housing passed like this. No question asked, no, nothing. And that conversation started in this group, which makes me to believe that this group has power to pass bills to growers. We have no power, I'm guessing, in passing a bill similar to them for community housing. For us, we asked for 20 millions. Right now, we are until 10, and we have had, I have no idea how many sessions we have been speaking to the committee that is going to make the last decision. I wonder what has this group done, or Oregon Housing Community Survey, if any. And I'm not asking, you know, if you cannot do it because you cannot interfere, I would like to understand that, because the other bill came from this group. So I don't understand why this other bill cannot move along.
So logistically speaking, so when the original bill language was passed for the Department of Ag to carry that part of the funding, it was part of the big priority bill. So it had a lot of traction. Those conversations OHCS was not involved with. We were asked technical questions because that's what permission we had from our leadership's leadership. I'll say that. We could do technical. So we were able to tell them like some background about our programs and those things and what the current need is, which there's a lot of need. And so that was explained to them, but because it was in the midst of a whole bunch of other huge priorities for the entire legislature, for the governor, it got to go through fairly quickly. I believe are you talking about 3555?
HB 3555, okay. Yes.
So my understanding is it's not behind, it's currently with everything that has any kind of fiscal on it at all. And because it would be funding to a brand new program, we as an agency had to make sure that there's a fiscal, because if we don't do a fiscal, we don't get staff to do that. We don't get, essentially it would have just been added to someone's job and it wouldn't have been done properly and effectively. So everything, and I mean, even if you asked for just any tiny little amount, and then especially since there's a $10 million allocation with it, it has to go to Ways and Means. So it is paused in Ways and Means because essentially each member, from my understanding, they are deciding their own priority lists. They go to their priority list to their leadership, that leadership discusses, and then things start moving through Ways and Means. So right now, all of those conversations are happening. So if you know who those are and those key members are to talk to, as an agency, we can't take positions on bills that the governor hasn't allowed us to take positions on. We are in communication with members asking and working with logistical questions, because if a new program comes and new funding source is available, we want it to succeed. Like that's our job, is to make it work and be successful. So it is way behind compared to 2001, but it's not way behind compared to anything else that has a funding need in regards to the legislature. There's a couple of bills that have snuck through before a lot of political stuff has happened, but I think the bill's in a good location and a good place. The power questions and the influence would be on those members making their priority list of like, what bills are they going to fight for? Because at this point, it's kind of up to a specific members of if they want to fight for that legislation or not. So that's kind of what I would say, because that's where the pressure is. And then Jeff, you have, I don't know, Meg, do you think that's enough, or can I see if Jeff has a question that relates?
Thank you for the explanation.
Okay.
I think my concern is that, again, a community that was impacted by COVID-19, not any other, but it was there working and giving the life for all of us to have food in our table.
Yep.
is left behind again. That's my concern. Thank you.
That's, I am a wife of a farmer, so I very much understand that need. So, I wish I had more authority over things, but I only have my little box to stand in. And then Jeff, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to amplify. I'm Jeff Stone. I'm the executive director of the Oregon Association of Nurseries. I want to amplify that Tanisha's explanation was actually quite excellent. And it is the appropriate role of this group and the OHCS to give technical advice to the committee, to members, and to the governor. You can't go outside what the governor wants to do. I would also say, Meg, that everything is down in Ways and Means. Everything. And they're not going to move until after the May forecast. Once they get the May revenue forecast, then they'll know exactly how much money they have, how much the kicker is going to kick, all those type of things. And then Tanisha is absolutely right. I would talk to advocates at the legislature who see this as a top priority and have them put it on their go home list. So I just wanted to affirm, Tanisha, that was I wish more people would replicate that exact explanation. So good job, and I'm sorry I was late.
Oh, thank you for being here. Does anyone have any other questions before we close up that section?
I guess, maybe at some point, I think it is helpful to understand how the fiscal ask piece kind of impacts different proposed legislation. And I guess it would be good to hear, just because it's not clear to me, just kind of how, like, the money to the Department of Ag, why that wouldn't involve fiscal, but this does. So at some point, it would be helpful to get more information on that, since it does seem to impact, the ability for legislation to be approved.
Let me check. I am, depending how 2001. So if they do an RFP, I'm looking at the language right now. There's certain language because they may have done a fiscal. We did a fiscal for 2001 because we also had need to hire research staff as well. So we put a fiscal in 2001 and it didn't inhibit it at all, because essentially staffing is important. And if you don't advocate for staffing for when a bill goes through, then there may be no one who can perform the function effectively. And so it can, I'll be honest, any kind of money ask will decrease the likelihood of a bill going through. Like, if you're asking for funding of any kind, the 10 million versus 20 million, lowering that down increased the odds in a tight budget year for it to pass. So there's definitely money talks, but there's definitely an understanding of having fiscals. And I think ours was fairly minor for this bill compared to other things that we've asked, because this is something we can do. We don't have a person on staff that can take and run with this program. So we put one on 2001, and I'm checking real quick to see if the language in 2001 had the Department of Ag's.
Yeah, I think, I would just say, to Tanisha's point earlier, that some of these changes happened without our, frankly, knowledge or input on adding this into 2001 and the 5 million from the Ag Labor Housing Work Group, and the movement of that over to Department of Ag. I think Department of Ag is going to do a great job with it. I think it's just fundamentally looks a little different than sort of a lot of the things that we discussed in this group. And I think we'll probably have to talk with Department of Ag, and I'm don't mean to speak for them, but with folks in this group on sort of how that 5 million will be structured. It seemed a little more targeted specifically at sort of renovations to OSHA updates, to the OSHA rules that are being updated currently. And maybe we'll ask those folks to kind of give us an update if there is any available after Tanisha's done. But yeah, I think some political movement happened. It got looped into a larger omnibus bill that was part of the governor's key priorities, and so was able to pass faster than sort of anything else, which it's just Tanisha, just reiterating what Tanisha already eloquently said earlier. So yeah.
And just to add, Department of Ag did get $500,000 for staffing for that bill on top of the 5 million that they got allocated for the grants. I just checked the bill language. So they technically also got a fiscal, they just got that funding locked in statute instead of requested at a later date. But I will defer to Nicole if she has a second to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Nicole Mann, I represent the Columbia Gorge fruit growers for purposes of this conversation. So we have obviously on-farm housing. I was very late to the meeting, so I don't know what you have already shared. I was just saying we did work closely with Representative Jeff Helfrich, who was co-chair of that. So I'm happy to answer any questions about how we got to where we got, or how we at least intend the rollout and funding to go through ODA. But I don't want to repeat anything you've already said. So if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We haven't talked about it at all. So if you have information about what you understand to be the rollout, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the intent behind the $5 million grant funds is to prepare on-farm housing employer, how would I say, those who provide on-farm housing to their employees to be able to meet the new regulations that are coming from Oregon OSHA. So we know that Oregon OSHA has been doing their rulemaking for a number of years. We anticipate seeing the new regulations. Now, what those will be, I think is to be determined. But there is in the record under that bill, the sheet, like a big spreadsheet with a few charts that came from Oregon OSHA of about 50 regulatory things that they are considering at the moment. This still has a lot of public input, and so we don't know exactly where they'll land, but there is about 50 that they're looking at that would be regulatory changes, and the cost of implementing those ranges from probably rough estimate, I would say $200 per housing unit to $1,000, because we're talking anywhere from rewiring to just installing a new screen. But given that, the point of the $5 million is to help those housing providers come into new compliance with those regulations without having to go into debt, to do it quickly. And there are going to be sideboards on that money. Money will be prioritized for those who go above and beyond some of those new regulations. So let's say they don't decide that it's not a regulation that you need to have separate washing machines for work clothing, although maybe a housing provider decides to do that. The grants would then be prioritized for something like that. So something that goes above and beyond the minimum OSHA requirements. So that's the intent. It's all around that OSHA regulation. They can't just go decide that they want to, I don't know, plant flowers in the front yard or something and use the grant money for that. And then it went.
Whoa. We love flowers. Don't hate on the nursery industry, man.
I never know what I'm going to say to get a comment from Jeff. And then the reason it went through ODA, I think I kind of came in when there was questions around that. That was mostly just out of ease. So our growers have experience working with ODA, who had funneled money through OWEB during COVID when we had some of those emergency COVID funds. They worked through ODA and OWEB, who hired a third-party administrator to work with some grant funds that went out during COVID. And so the hope was to sort of reuse that system that they had already created because growers were used to it and there was that relationship there. And to not add more onto OHCS than they're already doing. And in an event to keep it separate from the ag workforce housing tax credit. It was really important to us that those conversations remain separate. This is like a one-time funding designated for the Oregon OSHA regulations that are coming. Tax credit is totally separate, ongoing. Hopefully we made that very clear and it doesn't change any funding that goes to that tax credit, but that was sort of the intention and where we were headed, if that is helpful.
That was super helpful for me, Nicole. So thank you so much for sharing that. But if anyone else has questions about that.
I guess just, and I know, I'm not sure, do you have a sense, and I know you're not the Department of Ag, but we understood that there would also be opportunity for stakeholder feedback when kind of regulations are developed, creating the criteria for the distribution of those funds. Do you know what the timeline is for that?
I would have to look it up in the bill. I do know that there's a stakeholder because that was discussed. I'm going to try to find it really fast. But as far as timeline rollout, no, I don't have that information. That would be an ODA decision. I'm looking to see if I can find that specific stakeholder language for you, but it might take me a minute.
I imagine they're waiting for the OSHA rule process to be finalized first before taking the next step. So that would be a good place. I think if y'all are not already involved in those conversations and want to be, I think there's, I'm speaking out of turn, but I think that's an ongoing rules advisory process that's happening currently. I don't know if anyone from OSHA is on the line and knows more than my bare minimum, but yeah, I think if you wanted to get involved in that, I think now's the time.
So does the money need to be spent within the biennium?
The current one?
Yeah, will the 5 million need to be spent within the biennium?
Not this one, the next biennium.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of the timing here, given how long it's taken OSHA to get the rules done. If that's a precursor to this money getting out, it seems like it's compressing the time frame to get that money out pretty quickly. I'm just a little concerned about the timing here.
I see Sarah on, so she may be able to give a better update on OSHA's time, I probably hopeful timeline of these new rules. We were hoping that those rules would be out within the next year when we were looking at making this language in the bill, but I'll let Sarah speak to Oregon OSHA's intentions.
So, and I've made the mistake before of saying we'll propose by roughly such and such date, but our intention is to dial in on specific rule language through these monthly meetings. Our next meeting is next Wednesday. Let me know if you want the link, if you're not already on my list, so that we are ready to propose in the new year. It's really unlikely and not impossible, but pretty infeasible for us to propose in like December, just literally because of schedules and offices being closed and whatnot. So the goal would be proposal as soon after the new year as possible. So for example, next week, we're discussing 3 or 4 specific rules, including specific language on those rules. And then next month, we'll move on to a couple more items. And as an example, this is kind of this is not okay, well, let me just tell you what it is. There's been a suggestion to notify occupants that space heaters are available. It's a simple thing. The rule requires heating. And when there's no central heat and the temperature is a certain temperature, the rule requires that space heaters be provided. So we're going to discuss language for what that rule would look like, including a document we at Oregon OSHA would create, a symbol of sorts, or I don't know, a symbol of sorts that you could post saying, maybe it would show a thermometer and maybe it would show like 68 degrees and below through symbols, and then maybe the image of a space heater and then the telephone number of who to call or where it's located. So like a pictogram of sorts. So we're going to dial in on language through these monthly meetings on various things. And that was a more minimal thing I brought up, but just to give you an example of what we are talking about at the meetings and specifically what we are discussing, like what exactly will the language look like?
And I think the other thing that I would add, because I have found it in the language now, is part of the reason we put on the record that chart from Oregon OSHA of the 50-ish things that are being discussed is the intent is that ODA will use that when deciding the criteria by which these grants will be allowed, and that it will be for these things that are currently being considered. And then in the bill language, it says that within 30 days of the adoption of these rules by Oregon OSHA, that grant application criteria must be, or shall, I think is the words, shall be updated to only include what those new regulations are. So go ahead, Sarah. Did you have something? I see your.
No, I'm just going, oh, okay, interesting. I did want to touch briefly on, there is historic precedent for sometimes using a grace period. Maybe a grace period isn't the best word, but a phase-in period. But we generally use that language for high cost items. So something like the space heater notification, which is just going to be a document and we are going to create a pictogram to help you. Maybe we wouldn't need a phase in, that would be implemented on day one. But something bigger like AC, mind you, we've already adopted a heat rule. So don't think that's what we're discussing, but mind you, something like in whole house AC is high cost, high ticket. There is more precedent what we've done in the past that we would give a period of phase in for something like that.
And I think the phase in is allowed. It's just this grant application they'll say, you know, if for example, there was the ability to plant flowers as something that we've been thinking about to just make housing more welcoming and warm and environmental. And then in the Oregon OSHA rulemaking, they say, actually, no, that's not one of the things that we're going to move forward with. We're going to put that on the table for maybe next time or something. Then grant money would no longer be allowed to be utilized to do that. It's going to be utilized for whatever Oregon OSHA deems is sort of the most important, or that's not a good word to use. Whatever they deem is going to be the new rules.
And I think I'd say that piece of it, to Lisa's question in the chat, OHCS is going to have to be closely connected with Department of Ag as they roll out program design for this. If the new funding is just for kind of rehab of existing on-farm units, it's not sort of the same scope as the recommendations that we discussed previously, and where we sort of suggested that if we were to do such a thing, we might be able to move all of the ag credits to community-based. I think it sounds as though this 5 million would not be able to be used for new on-farm construction, and that is typically what our tax credits go towards for on-farm units. So if that is the case, we might be creating a gap by shifting all of those credits away. I'm not committing to anything right now, just stating that it does look a little different. We're going to have to continue to have conversations with Department of Ag on how they're going to roll out their funding so that we can make sure we don't unintentionally create gaps by shifting the tax credit preemptively.
And then did you already talk about the grant that's currently in the process for community-based housing? That's in a different bill, hasn't passed yet. I just didn't want community-based folks to think that they were left out and on-farm is the only one who got any grant funding.
Well, it is,
Yeah.
it's cut in half and likely isn't going to move anywhere.
Oh, that's
It's-
news to me. Okay.
It's
Thank you.
currently in Ways and Means. Tanisha brought up kind of the status of it earlier, and yeah, as Lisa mentioned and Meg mentioned earlier, they reduced the total amount of dollars in there.
Mhm.
It sounds as though it's not dead. It's still in process, but and we're keeping an eye on that as well, because again, if that passes, I think that would impact sort of how we operate some of our current funding as well. So yeah, a
Mhm.
lot of balls in the air at the moment that we're trying to keep track of, and appreciate all of you all's
Mhm.
commitment to keeping up with it too.
Lisa, let me know if we can do anything, the fruit growers to help with that push. Like I said, we've worked with Representative Jeff Helfrich. I know that it was moved from the 15 million to 10, I think, but if there's anything that we can do to keep that going, please let me know.
Yeah, if you, absolutely, if you can encourage him to, I mean, they've passed it out of their committee, it's with Ways and Means, but if he's still able to have some kind of input on encouraging that to be one of the people's top bills, because from what I understand, every legislator is supposed to give their 3 top priorities. And part of the problem in this, and why I don't think it's going to go very far, is because there's so many priorities that people have right now. And so I feel like this one, the on-farm stuff already got passed. So there's less concern about the community-based stuff for whatever reason. So if Helfrich, because he is a strong voice, if he could encourage people to support this that are on Ways and Means or something so that it can pass, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, I'll talk to him next week because the last conversation I had with him that was last week, he thought that this bill was still going through with that 10 million. So let me touch base with him and then I'll circle back with you offline. I'm sorry for everybody that I've blown up your meeting for the last 15 minutes. So continue on. I apologize.
Thank you.
Super helpful updates. Thank you, Nicole. And Sarah. Thanks, Sarah, too.
And I guess just to go back to Peter's point about the timing of it, even if the proposed regs are issued in the beginning of 24, there's going to be a process for obviously to have comments. And then, so I don't know if Sarah has an estimate of when they would be finalized. And remind me again of what the dates would be for the next biennium in terms of when the funds would need to be used by.
So the only thing I could say about rules is that we would hope to file with the Secretary of State as soon into 2024 as possible. So I mean like the first week of January. That would be the goal. And regarding the funding, can anybody else chime in on that? As I see the frustration that we are tied together, yet at the same time, Oregon OSHA doesn't have anything to do with it. And I just acknowledge how hard that is.
Yeah.
I think we
That's-
can probably commit to, sorry, Tanisha, go for it.
No, well, I was just going to reiterate, I see the frustration there, but again, it will essentially be up to the Department of Ag of how exactly they want to structure the program and how they want to make that role. I am sure that they are aware of that, but I also would just encourage you to maybe just make that comment if you get to have a meeting with them as well, that there's some pressure there about being able to spend the funds, and I'm sure they're thinking about it, but it never hurts to just elevate that to them as well. But I wanted to just add on to that.
Yeah, I think we can commit to making sure that someone from Department of Ag is able to make the next facilitation team meeting, because I think that is an important conversation to have with them at the table. We've had some initial conversations with them just so they kind of could get an idea of what the initial process for these recommendations was. And yeah, I think they are hoping to be involved in conversations with all of this group and OHCS and OSHA and everyone at the table. So yeah, I think we'll commit to reaching out to them and ensuring somebody who represents them and their timelines is here next time, so that we're not committing to having it next week on their behalf.
And just so I have it in my head, so what, I apologize for not knowing the biennium dates, but what would be like the deadline to use the money?
It would be what, Tanisha, 2025, June 2025.
Mhm.
I will say too, you know, it is at 100% Peter's point on timeline and getting the funding out is accurate, especially I think Department of Ag doesn't have as much infrastructure for this type of funding as maybe other agencies. But I do think, you know, I think to some of the points that Nicole made, it's more quickly produced rehabilitation to get up to standards, as opposed to, you know, new construction, which obviously has a longer timeline and might take a little bit more capacity for a Department of Ag. I think reimbursement for things like air conditioning units or space heaters or things like that is able to turn around obviously a lot faster than some of the larger scale projects that we're used to with that type of funding. So I'm still pretty optimistic that they'll be able to meet that, but also would like to bring them in and help them do that, I think.
Can I ask one more question? Just clarifying, you guys mentioned that this would be used only for these future rule adoptions, correct? And I say that because we already adopted heat rules, and because there's a big difference with the ALH operator, a housing operator, complying with the minimum of that rule, for example, shade and like a cooling towel. There's a big difference to the occupant between that and having a room, even if it's not whole house or central, having a room with a window AC in it. And just kind of wanted to clarify, would there be any possibility that the funds could be used to better comply with that very recently adopted rule?
I think my understanding is that that would come down to the criteria by which grants can be awarded that ODA would have to determine. The language, I was looking at the language while you were asking that question. And I don't know that it's clear, or that I feel it's clear enough for me to tell you a yes or no.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay, awkward silence. You know, I'm working on it. But it always, you know, makes my skin crawl for whatever reason. I feel like I should be better at it at this point. I guess so for next meeting, we are committing to having someone from Department of Ag show up. Sarah, if someone from OSHA could be here again to sort of give an update on that rules process. And then we will come back with sort of small projects, at least some kind of further along draft of some of the criteria there to make sure it's able to align with the ag worker housing tax credit project's needs. And then I'm sure we will have more legislative updates by then. It sounds like there's a May projection that could, you know, kind of loosen a lot of the clogging that's going on there. So we'll probably loop you back into Tanisha. Anything else that folks are hoping to accomplish at the next meeting? Obviously, Martin and I are regulars here, but not usually the facilitators. So we try to take a group approach, I think, to what folks want to hear about. If anybody has anything to say, otherwise we can, let you all go a little bit early today.
Nothing from us, but I look forward to seeing anybody at our anybody who's going to attend our ALH meeting next week. And I'll see y'all next month.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sarah and Nicole. Appreciate it. And everyone for your questions. Appreciate it. Good to see everybody. And yeah, I'll see you next month. And congrats to Tim. Okay, take care.